of developed nations. So of developed nations, the lowest environmental standards pretty much across the board are in the United States. And yet we have sort of set the floor for our own environmental and sustainability standards based on what the minimum standard is among our with our largest trading partner. As that trading relationship becomes different, we are going to have to seek markets elsewhere, anywhere in Europe, Southeast Asia, pretty much most of the Pan-Pacific Rim. We've got Australia, New Zealand. Their environmental and sustainability standards are higher. And so it does become a competitive advantage to be the company that can say, yes, we are doing these things. Just for some additional detail. So there is increased global demand for resources and materials and land. So anything that we can do to maximize and reclaim the value of what's already been used will be of use to us. Public and political pressures in different areas are restricting development. They are causing consumer behavior changes. That's number 3, consumer demand. Investor sentiment is a big one. We have a whole new generation of investors now that will not invest unless they can be assured that the risk associated with environmental and sustainability issues is identified and mitigated. There's increasing regulation on issues related to materials and mobility of those materials. Risk and liability issues. And then, as I already mentioned, which is most relevant in today's environment, is the competitive marketplace. And yet, despite all of this, and the thing that led to this project is when we started asking, this is primarily Manitoba companies that responded to this, how aware are you of circularity? And we got about 60% in the first year, closer to 70% in the second year, but it's still not high enough that we were convinced people were actually leveraging this. And then when we asked why, about just under half, they point to lack of information or their internal capacity as a barrier to doing this. So that's where this project steps in to try and help companies get through that. We will now go through 5 circular business models very quickly. This was presented in the first session of this webinar. It's important though that we revisit them to understand how the tools were developed. The 5 circular business models, and we've named them for what is most useful for the audience that we're serving here. But if you looked internationally, these might be identified using different language. They're all about the same. So the use of circular inputs, resource recovery and recycling, product life extension, asset sharing, and product or performance as a service, sometimes called XaaS. So when we're talking about use of circular inputs, that's a system where products, materials, and resources are designed, produced, used, and repurposed in a continuous cycle. Before I continue, I will just say that of all these 5 business models, they will overlap, and that's a good thing. The more overlap there is between these business models, the more reinforcing they become. Also, any particular company is very rarely going to use just one model, and very rarely will a company say, we are completely circular using this model. It's about taking bits and pieces of the models to the different parts of your shop that make it most valuable. So to go back to this model, use of circular inputs, some of the activities or examples that you might see in your own shop: procurement of low energy input or materials, incorporating reclaimed materials in product design, or return and recovery of materials through reverse logistics. Second one is resource recovery and recycling. So this is where we're collecting and reusing or recycling valuable materials. So this is like a subset or subsegment of the previous one that we covered. And some of the examples of activities that you'd have to undertake to engage with this model is collection and sorting of waste. So basically this is making sure that you understand all the material, like not material significance, but physical material in your shop and where it's going and where it's coming from. This is where we would reuse products and materials, usually in our own shop, but sometimes, like, if there's a market for, if you need a lot of wood and there's wood pallets and it's coming from a different shop, that would also fall in there. And recycling of discarded products into new materials. Product life extension. These are processes that prolong the period of usefulness of products. So examples are offering maintenance services for products, like not as a separate entity, but writing it right in. Providing instruction manuals to customers. So IKEA and Apple have both been mandated by the Securities Exchange Commission in the US to provide these instructions also whatever the European equivalent to that agency is, because consumers wanted the ability to keep their products in play longer. So now they have to provide IKEA for assembly now and disassembly, and Apple for the basics on how to fix your phone. The third example is designing product upgrades to extend the useful life of the product. Asset sharing. This is where we make partnerships between companies to share resources like materials, equipment, or work sites. And this usually requires a high level of digitization. Like these platforms are most efficiently facilitated through the digital platforms. And examples would be very minimal examples. So sharing delivery vehicles, collaborating to share specialized tools. The example I use for this is for plant shutdowns. So I worked in a plant where we'd shut down for 2 weeks every year. The specialized maintenance crew would come in for our high-tech equipment. I was in aerospace. Our neighbor factory was also an aerospace company, and they would have a shutdown 2 weeks later, all the same equipment, and a different crew came in and they had their own equipment. So you had like a terrible asset utilization rate. Whereas if the companies had collaborated to share teams, share tools, have shutdown staggered as it already was, they would have better asset maximization. Another example is co-locating with businesses to share office or warehouse space. Warehouses have always done this. We saw a lot more co-locating of businesses during COVID. And this one is a little bit easier to accommodate because the cost benefit analysis is very clear right off the hop. The last model is product or performance as a service, or XaaS. So this is where we allow access and performance for a customer, but we don't give them the option of ownership. So generally you're offering something like a pay-per-use, a lease, or a subscription, or you're building in scheduled maintenance services for products. It's basically acknowledging that most people don't need a table saw, but they might want to use the functionality of a table saw once or twice a year or lifetime. Okay, now we've talked about the project, we talked about circular economy as a whole, the 5 business models, and now I just want to make a couple of notes on why we dialed it in onto supply chain circularity. This is a supply chain focused project. Prairie Scan is, they funded it through Supply Chain Canada, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So why did we focus here? The lowest hanging fruits when it comes to circularity is within the procurement function. The adoption of circular supply chain strategies, it adds resilience to the supply chain function first, and that can usually be accounted for first. The basics of what it takes to adopt circularity at the procurement level is already in place. We don't have to really change anything. And when we're talking about supply chain here, we're talking about sourcing and procurement, transportation and warehousing. The tools that you're going to be seeing today, they relate primarily to sourcing and procurement. And what are those tools, you ask? Well, let's talk about them. The tools, the number 2, number 3, number 4 on this list, as well as number 1, were the outcomes of this project. So a foundational peer-reviewed consolidated set of information. That is, if you were in the first webinar, that was sort of the high level of that foundational information that was presented. This information is available now through the Supply Chain Canada website, I believe. Rick and Donaldin can correct me if I'm wrong there. Either way, that's who you talk to if you want access. The tools, an organizational readiness assessment, a procurement readiness assessment, and procurement guidelines are what I'm going to show you today. So first, let's talk about the internal assessments. The point of using these is to allow senior leadership and your procurement team to go through an assessment and identify the current state. So we're not providing specific the tool does not provide specific recommendations or give specific tips. It's like, here we are right now. And the results allow for identification of strengths and focus areas. It allows to the identification of external weaknesses. So circular economies and circularity implies significant linkages between different departments in a shop, different companies on the same block, municipal, provincial, and federal jurisdictions. And so there is reliance on things that happen in other areas that you can't control. This assessment hopefully will allow you to recognize that. It also is intended to identify areas of opportunity. Like if you're really good in one space, then start by accommodating a business model or adopting a business model that relies exclusively on that skill set or on that on that space. But also it allows identification of internal barriers to adoption so that you know what you have to work on if you want to go further. Let's talk about the first one. This is the organizational readiness assessment. So the intention here is to provide companies with a means of assessing how ready their organization is, so enterprise level, to adopt circular practices. It's qualitatively measured against known enablers of success. So those criteria are those known to be required for strong and effective governance of sustainability, risk, and opportunities. So while this is supply chain focused and it is circularity focused, it is like if we're talking circularity, it is an enterprise-wide sustainability initiative and business model adjustment. And so this organizational readiness assessment, it is against general sustainability governance criteria. Those criteria are culture and executive buy-in, strategic planning and risk assessment, policy and regulatory environment, materials and waste management infrastructure, awareness and understanding, network strength, customer pull, supply chain influence, and access to quality data and information. So I'll give you some examples. So those were the criteria that I gave you the list of. So one of them was strategic planning and risk assessment. And for each criteria, there is a set of indicators. In this case, excuse me, I'm sorry. Material sustainability issues are understood by the people in the company that need to know them. Material risks to the company are known, and there's a documented strategic plan. Another example, if we were to take the culture and executive buy-in criteria, indicators we used for this, there is a documented corporate commitment to sustainability. There's an executive champion or owner, and the personal values of the executive are sustainability aligned. So these are not fabricated or made up by us. This is the collection of what success factors look like for sustainability and other enterprise level business model adjustments across multiple sectors. The tool itself, currently in spreadsheet form, and the next iteration of this will be something a little bit more interactive online. It's just a spreadsheet. But if we look on the left, we've got the indicator. So the criteria line you don't see here, but there'd be one indicator. Here we have documented corporate commitment to sustainability, and it's asking you to identify what currently best represents your current state between 0 and 3. And these current state descriptions, those were populated. And so you're just choosing what works best. It's not like you have to define it. As you go to define, am I a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3, you would provide the link to the evidence that demonstrates that. So as an example, if you're the best in show, you would have a documented policy that provides specific commitment to sustainability or circularity, which includes a commitment to improving performance over time. Your evidence would be, here's a link to the policy, because that way when other people look at this, you know what you're referencing back to. For this particular indicator, not having any policy or document available would represent a 0, and your score would reflect a 0. Let's go on to the second tool, which is the procurement function readiness assessment. So this is where organizations we're providing them with a means of assessing how ready their supply chain function and processes are to adopt circular supply chain actions. And again, it's qualitatively measured against industry and internal supply chain factors. So specifically, the criteria that we use are known to be those that are required for cost-effective, resilient procurement functions. The specific criteria for this readiness assessment is the policies and practices available, awareness and communication, a mapped supply chain, supplier evaluation practices, materials inventory and management practices, and your monitoring and reporting. So we'll go through the same, I'll show you the indicators that we use as examples. So one of the criteria identified was awareness and communication. Indicators that we use on this one is procurement staff are aware of how materials are used. So can your supply chain staff say, I order this, widget A from supplier over here, and I understand exactly where widget A is used in the company and how it's used, including its lifespan. The second indicator is there's effective communication protocols between procurement and other staff. So can procurement staff go and talk to the design staff and understand what's happening? If the design staff are saying, can we do something else? Do they go to the procurement staff and say, hey, see what you can find? In my experience, the one on the right, the effective communication between procurement and other staff does tend to be a stronger weakness, the larger the company gets. So another criteria that we have here on procurement is monitoring and reporting. And our indicators, there's a process to understand what procurement variables to monitor. There's effective data collection, and there's an internal reporting system to make sure all that data that we collect goes to where it's supposed to go and is interpreted appropriately. Same thing, its current state, or the current format of this tool is just an Excel spreadsheet. But to use an example of the effective systems and processes to collect data, to collect needed data as the indicator, you go through, you read these descriptions, and you identify the one that best represents your company right now. So if you're a 0, it is we don't collect needed data, and we don't have systems or process to do so. If you're, most companies are going to be a 1 or 2. So if you're a 2, we've got some tools and we collect some data and we are reasonably confident that it is accurate. If you're just the Mac Daddy in this space, we have all the systems and tools that we need to collect all the data that we need. We're collecting it and we have full confidence that it is accurate. I'm going to move on to the circular procurement guidelines. So as you'll remember from the 4 outcomes of this project, there was the foundational information of number 1, organizational assessment tool, number 2, procurement readiness assessment tool, number 3, and the 4th was the circular procurement guideline. So we'll go through that now. So this is a guideline that just presents a set of principles and recommendations with some additional context about circularity to assist with integration of circular economy principles into the procurement process. It's meant to be picked away and accommodated in your existing process to every extent that it can be. It's not meant to replace your existing procurement process. So why would we use this guideline? Sourcing products and suppliers and purchasing, as has been mentioned already, is usually the first and most inexpensive way to introduce circularity into the company. For those of you on the procurement side of things, you know that your suppliers understand your role as the customer. If you tell them you're looking for an alternative, if they have one, they will bring it to you. Sometimes they're just scared to go and bring you something else because they don't want to risk that customer relationship. There are also not existing standardized instructions for procurement, especially within SMEs. Everyone's got the method that developed organically for what worked best for them. And so something like guidelines allows you to say, okay, this works for us. I'll put this over here in this policy, or maybe we need to kick that back to somewhere else. Also, the guidelines provide useful content for inclusion into existing SME processes if you don't have that element of your process. And it is designed to strengthen your existing procurement process. One of the things it presents, and that's what the rest of these slides will look like, it'll be just the graphics of the type of information that is presented in the guideline. These represent the major sections, and then there's additional detail and context for each of them. So we provide you with a simplified circular procurement process, so you can overlay that with your own existing procurement process. So starting with integration of a circular economy into the business culture, and it gives you 3 means of doing that there, right through to monitoring and reporting on the circular economy process. This is one of the most valuable pieces of the procurement guideline, in my opinion. It provides circularity priorities for procurement. It's because this whole project is sector agnostic, it's very, very difficult to provide information on which specific products to select because of their circularity, because everyone's going to use different products. But what we can provide is certain criteria or certain things to think about to determine what is more circular versus what is less circular, and what is more energy and resource intensive versus what is less energy and resource intensive. And not coincidentally, those are inversely related. So if it's more circular, chances are it's the least energy and resource intensive. So the bold text on the left, that is generally top to bottom priority for how you want to categorize products coming into your shop. And so your role when you have this prioritization matrix list, whatever you want to call it, is this is how you relate to your suppliers. First, you would say, do I need that product? Then you would say, can I redesign the product? You talk to your engineering staff, you go to your supply chain and say, give me something that serves the purpose, but it's modular in design, as an example. And so all of this, like the additional context that I'm providing now, is in that guideline. We also provide a list of challenges and potential resolution strategies. I'm only giving you 2 challenges here. There's a lot of challenges, and we've listed what we think are all of them. I think it's maybe a dozen or so, and some strategies to deal with that. And also some circularity indicators that you can use as you deal with your suppliers and as you report back up to your management teams. So just some examples are listed here. Not surprisingly, they are related directly to that prioritization scale that I showed a few slides back. So within that, we talk about the criteria, we describe what it is, provide some examples, and you can see some of them are consumer based, but some of them are also more industrial based. And then what a potential indicator could be. Those are obviously convertible for whatever product that you're talking about. And then we talk about supplier criteria. So if you're going to talk to a supplier, how do you know that you're engaging them on circularity? So some of the things, and this is just, there's 4 of them here, but there's more in the document. Commitment to circular economy. Do they conduct a life cycle assessment? Do they have circular inputs in their own manufacturing process? Do they have a take back program? As you go through and develop or redevelop or adjust your supplier evaluation strategy, this is the type of stuff that you can ask for. All suppliers, because in the prairies, we are all part of bigger value chains, all of the major suppliers have seen all this before because they're seeing it from the bigger customers. And so we don't have to worry that we're scaring them away, but by cueing them that this is on your radar, you're giving them rationale to go and seek alternatives. And so, yes, we provide you with this list of criteria that can be adjusted as you see fit, but can also be used directly. And then we give you just a step-by-step on how to use the procurement guidelines, starting with ensuring you've got an understanding of circular procurement, and then going right down to monitor and reporting. That's very much related to the overall procurement process. So we developed these tools, and of course, we're a bunch of consultants that don't actually do this, don't actually get engaged in procurement on a day-to-day basis. So credibility is a little sketchy, maybe sometimes, I don't know. So we seconded a couple of companies, 5 or 6, I can't remember, 5 or 6 companies to review and test these tools for us. And they did this cold, like they weren't involved in the project. We just said, here they are. Here's the basic instruction that we would give any company. Can you please review these for us? So this isn't going to, the results are not like an empirical data set where we had, 1,000 companies. It's only 5, but it's still valuable enough for us to know that we are definitely on the right track. And I want to go through some of those results with you. So the objective was to get insight and constructive feedback on the ease of use and effectiveness of the tools. The idea being that the testing would be done in time, that if there were any material changes that we thought needed to be made, we could make them before the project closed. And great news for us, none of the feedback suggested we had, systematically screwed this thing up. Some of the highlights. So qualitative assessments and validation process was developed, like as in we gave templates and instructions for how companies should evaluate these things. We had a target test group of 5 SMEs between Manitoba and Saskatchewan. They were provided with an orientation seminar like this, background information in the form of documentation and instructions for how to use the tools. They were given about 4 weeks to complete the testing, but we estimated that total testing time would take between 4 and 24 hours. We just gave them enough time to fit it into their workflow. And the results of testing were summarized for future edits to the tools. So those future recommendations for edits will go back to Supply Chain Canada, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan for the next iteration. So a quick breakdown of the 5 companies that participated. While we were looking for Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, we had one connection from Mississauga, Ontario. We didn't turn them away because feedback is still valuable. As you can see, we had a bit of a range there for the total annual value of goods and services purchased. Not too many people are going $50 to $60 million worth of purchased goods, but some. Number of employees, 500 is our cutoff for SME. As you can see, our Mississauga company came way above that, but the response was still useful. Annual revenue, basically between 1 and 20, and one company, 130 years of business. And when I saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, that's totally going to skew it. But then it turns out we had a Saskatoon company with 105 years in business, which is very impressive because it's generally the older companies that are hardest to adopt new ideas. Most importantly, all 5 indicated that they have a few circular initiatives that they're thinking of or that are on the go. More specific feedback, we asked for ease of understanding and use, clarity of terms and concepts, layout, ease of navigation. If they found that there was information missing, suggested improvements, and the actual graphic design. Great news. Everything seemed to be easy to understand and navigate. We did receive suggestions back, some of which easy to incorporate, some are less easy because this is sector agnostic. It would be great to see examples of businesses engaged in circularity. Our challenge with this is we need more companies to be vocal about the circular practices that they're adopting if we want to include that to share with people. We were asked to provide a little bit more explanation and definitions for some of our key terminology and some industry specific links to resources. Again, tougher because this is a sector agnostic tool. On the procurement guideline, same thing, easy to understand and navigate. People were generally happy with the graphics. One tester specifically said that they could already see the use of this tool to improve their own procurement process, which was great. Like they were already starting to make some changes. Specific suggestions for improvement, examples of, again, businesses engaged in circularity and definitions or explanations. So those suggestions we will take forward as the next iteration of these are produced. We will decide how easy or difficult that will be and how applicable it'll be. Okay, so I said I wanted to talk about the value of the tools. So before I get you into all the words there, throughout this project, when like we've done this type of presentation, I don't know, like a dozen times, I think maybe at least over the last 2 years. And we always get good feedback, but we always get I have a hard time, people say I have a hard time articulating the value and sending it to the managers or the accountants or the CEO. Totally fair. One of the major limitations of this body of knowledge right now in this study is that in small and medium-sized companies, it is in its infancy. And so there has not been a lot of uniform data collection that you can take from one company and maybe apply it to another and use it to build your cost benefit. But the other part of it is it's so effective at being positive, like having a positive cost benefit, that becomes a strategic advantage or competitive advantage for one company. They're not going to be sharing it. So we had to find another way to convey what that value is, and they're more qualitative statements. But the value of adopting or taking a look at these tools, going through them and adopting the procurement guidelines is it's a very cost-effective and practical way to get the information that you need, the basic information, and understand the steps that you need to introduce circularity into your supply chain function. The tools can be aligned with regular review and improvements of your procurement process, your strategic planning and your budget planning, as well as your supplier evaluation. It doesn't need to all be done at once. You can do it over a 6-month planning cycle, a 1-year planning cycle, and you're still going to be better off than you were the day before. Using these tools does come with access to that foundational information that we had referenced. There's no risk here. If the tools don't work, don't use them and don't change your processes. Although I suspect you will change your processes once you look at these tools. Even if the tools don't work for your procurement, you'll have a greater insight into your own operations. And that is very often one of the weak points is we don't spend enough time looking inward because we're too busy looking outward for threats and opportunities. And focusing on procurement first, as has already been mentioned, hopefully drilled this in, will reveal all the low-hanging fruit. And so if you can just tackle that, then other circularity elements, other parts of circular business models will find their way in if you can get this low-hanging fruit first. Okay, so what we would like, that is the end of the project. Big deal for those of us on the project team. We have this survey, as I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, 2 years of survey were done. I'm sorry. If you could please, we would like to get a certain minimum for our survey respondents. And I know it's tough to do surveys and it's annoying, but my voice is probably more annoying. So if you just take a scan of that QR code or click on the link when you get the thing, I'll stop talking, you do the survey. You might win $250. Everybody will be happy. And if you have any questions, here's my contact information and Mike's from Strategy Makers, and we would be happy to tackle any of this for you. And with that, Donna Lynn, maybe if you can let me know if there's any questions, I'd be happy to tackle them.
Well, look at you, Tanis, way under time. Everybody's going to get a lot of time back in the day. I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment, but if anybody has any questions, raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we can certainly address them.
I would like to say one thing while people think about that. We scheduled this meeting for an hour and a half because we ran out of time on the first round, but we hadn't yet developed the second round. So we wanted to make sure we didn't run out of time, but it turns out the second round was a little bit shorter. So we weren't just trying to mess with you. If there are no comments or you just would rather connect directly, that's totally fine. Otherwise, this webinar will be available, correct? And
Yeah,
you'll
we'll send
that
out the slide deck to everyone that was registered, as well as
Perfect.
the partial link to the webinar, because I started recording it late.
Okay. Then that's all we got, I think.
Last chance if anybody wants any questions. Okay, for anybody that is with Supply Chain Canada, of course, please self-report this as CPD. So it's 2 CPD points for attending our 40-minute webinar today. Again, we'll get you to self-report those just because we have people from all across Canada and we're not able to do that in each institute. Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending. Have a great rest of your morning or afternoon. Thanks,
Thank
Tanis.
you.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Bye.